media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Of course, one of the foundations for what we do here on Point of View is the Bible and Bible interpretation. Very important. But I think it is also true that most people don't really understand the Bible in terms of its main themes. Sometimes we focus on the specifics, and recently we did a program looking at Bible words. Let's now look back and look at some of those main themes that are very important. And I recognize that some people haven't had the chance to kind of look at that. So that's what we're going to focus on today as we talk about this book, The Bible I Never Knew, a closer look at Christianity's main themes. It is written by Dr. Peter Bylsma, and he is an individual that has a bachelor's degree from Wheaton College. He has a master's degree as well as a doctorate in education from the University of Washington in Seattle. Worked 10 years in various Christian ministries and agencies, and then 30 years in public service. And we also have a link to the bibliopress.com. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And not only is he known for this book, The Bible I Never Knew, but in the past has written this book, The Short Bible, a chronological survey or summary of Old and New Testament. Even has a simplified short Bible there as well. So, Dr. Bylsma, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk about the origin of the title, because many years ago, Philip Yancey wrote a book, The Jesus I Never Knew, and that was because he was concluded that even though people talk about Jesus, maybe they had some misconceptions about that, and in some respects, you sort of borrow that theme where he talked about the Jesus I never knew. You're talking about the Bible I never knew, and after having written your book, The Short Bible, I think you concluded that there would be maybe a need to spend some time maybe talking about some of the basic information and some of the main themes.
That's right. When I wrote The Short Bible, I had to figure out what the main themes were so that when I condensed it and summarized it, I made sure that all those main themes were there. And in that process, I was able to identify a number of main themes, and of course the characters that were part of those stories. But I realized, I needed to do a deep dive into that separate from writing the short Bible, because I didn't want to make the Bible, that book, any longer. I wanted to make it short. So that was kind of the origin of the idea to have a separate book that would look at the main themes in greater detail. And when I did some research on trying to find other books that did this, I didn't find any. And I thought, oh my goodness, we rely so much on this great set of books, 66 documents that are thrown together. But the main themes are sprinkled throughout what would be 2,000 pages worth of text if the Bible were all put together in a regular book these days. So that makes it difficult for us to study individual topics. For instance, love or mercy or grace or money or possessions or wealth or, you have it, how to do evangelism. You have all these examples, but they're spread out all over the place. And my background in education has given me the ability, and my background in studying complicated topics, it's given me the ability to understand complex topics and then simplify them and organize them and lay them out for a busy person so that they could grasp the ideas in a logical flow so that we can learn about it. And my sense is that as I've been to churches around the country and around the world, we tend not to spend time in a sermon going into great depth on particular topics. we might tell a story or so, and it might be an example of something, but we don't really have the time in a sermon to go into that kind of detail. So I decided I would write this book. Originally, I had about 10 topics in mind, and as I was writing, it kept growing and growing, and so now there are 19 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
An introduction chapter, and then some basic information about the Bible, and then there's deeper dives into the main themes and special topics.
In about 350 pages, 19 chapters. First section on basic information. We'll focus some time and attention there. And then the second part on main themes, then some special topics and appendices at the end. Book's been out about a year, so in some respects people might be able to find it, but I think the best way to do that is still to find the link that we've provided there where you can get it in paperback and Kindle. And I might just say, Peter, one of the things that I was struck by is how each year I go to the Pacific Northwest. I go to Oregon rather than Washington, where you're living, but I teach in a Bible school. And I was thinking, this is the kind of book I'd want to put in the hands of a young person who thinks they know a little bit about the Bible. Nothing smarter in the entire universe than a high school graduate who's convinced they know everything about everything. But this gets you into some of those details pretty quickly. But I thought just for a second, let's give some basic information. We're talking about 66 books in the Bible. We're talking about being written by 40 plus people on 3 different continents and 3 different languages. Those are some key elements. And then you even have a list here of the number of words in the Old Testament. And as people might imagine, the longest books, of course, would be the Psalms and others. But you also have some great material that we need to understand if we're going to dig into some of those biblical themes. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, so you referred to that first chapter where I kind of give the big picture. And I'm kind of a data analyst. And so I actually broke down each of the books and how many chapters and verses there are in it. I think it's interesting information to have in case somebody wanted to know that. But it also just shows the complexity of this Bible that has been compiled many, many years ago. It's put in a certain order. It's not in chronological order all the time. There's some repetition. And I would say that even though I've been a Christian for, 60 years or so, and my parents were involved in ministry, my dad was in Young Life, and he did some other work overseas in Arabic and Muslim areas. I really didn't feel like I knew the Bible that well. And so I thought, this is going to be edifying to myself when I do this research. And I found things that I never knew, and there were things that I thought I knew which aren't in the Bible. So this was an education for me, and I'm glad that I could kind of compile these themes and topics into a book that really is a useful tool for even people who were taking classes in seminary or pastors or wanting to do sermons. I mean, there's probably a year's worth of sermons that could be parsed out through this book with all the topics.
Yeah, let me take a break. We'll come back and maybe talk a little bit about biblical interpretation, and then we'll get into some of those themes because there are many to cover, and it's all part of this book, The Bible I Never Knew, a closer look at Christianity's main themes. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Target is the latest in a string of retail giants who have taken a stance against the wildly unpopular diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. That is how Steve Forbes begins his commentary on DEI in the business world. He adds that the recent move comes in the wake of similar actions by Walmart, Amazon, Meta, and Tractor Supply Company. As I mentioned in my commentary last week, the decision by large companies like Walmart to move away from DEI will certainly encourage other businesses to do the same. Target first announced its bathroom policy about gender identity back in 2016. It triggered a backlash and boycotts, but Tim Wildman of the American Family Association announced on my radio program they were ending their Target boycott. Not only are businesses changing their view about DEI, but Steve Forbes points to political leaders who are also expressing concern about DEI. Former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg recently criticized companies that use DEI training because it makes people sit through training that looks like something out of Portlandia. Longtime Democratic Party strategist James Carville has been critical of his party's self-destructive language and attitudes. He criticized the party's woke gender rules as stunningly stupid policies. You know, DEI policies are not only unpopular, they are unproductive. As I've cited in other commentaries, several business school studies illustrate the failings of DEI. Steve Forbes observes that numerous initiatives have unnecessarily raised the prices of energy, food, transportation, and housing. It appears that corporate America has discovered that DEI is a problem, and it is time to get back to work to please their customers. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on biblical reliability, go to viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. Viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing our conversation today with Peter Bylsma, and again, he is the author of this book, The Bible I Never Knew. And Peter, we of course have a chapter dealing with the Bible as literature, and there are various forms of literature, obviously, within the Bible, and then a whole section on biblical interpretation, which kind of brings me to the question I'm sure I get all the time, and that is, do you really believe the Bible literally? And again, I have to qualify that because there are figures of speech, there are various kinds of poetic language, then there are other parts of the Bible which is historical, but we want to use kind of a common sense evaluation of the literary form and understand that in the cultural and historical context. So before we move into some of those themes, I think it's important to maybe agree on the ground rules of how to interpret the Bible.
I agree. And I think we have a mistaken idea that everything is to be taken literally, when in fact there's different kinds of literature in the Bible, whether it's poetry or allegory or metaphors. Many things are mentioned in the context of that culture and geography. A lot of agrarian analogies. In poetry, we know things are not to be taken literally, but more figuratively or symbolically. So one really needs to understand the kind of literature one is reading at the time, because you could probably pull out of the scripture different things that are said and say, do you really believe that? Well, yes, I do, but if it's understood in the context of what's being said, it's not necessarily literally true, but it is a kind of a figurative way of teaching some principle. So it's important for a person to understand the kind of literature that is being used. And most of the time, it's pretty obvious when somebody says, God is our fortress. Clearly, that is a metaphor. God is not, some big castle on a hill or something. But it makes common sense to say, that is not to be taken literally. It's a form of speech to say something about the nature of God.
Sure. And again, let me just say that first section, although we're going to probably move on, has some great material about the history of the Bible, its structure, details, literature, understanding the Bible, even issues on the nature of God, communicating with God, science, truth, and miracles. But especially since so much of the book that you have written looks at those themes, let's come to that first one, and that is love, the Bible's main theme. And I don't think you can pick up the Bible without recognizing that it is focusing on the fact that God is love, that we're to love our enemies, and really the issue of love and the attribute of love runs all the way through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation.
That's right. And in fact, God loved the world so much that he created a beautiful world. And he loved Adam and Eve to the point where he actually was able to move on from their sin and love them despite their disobedience. And you see that flow of that theme of sacrificial love, forgiving love, generous love, all the way through to the very end when, God loves us all so much that we're with him for eternity. And of course, the term love is often misused or misunderstood. What we're talking here is the agape type of love, the sacrificial love that's not selfish, it's not physical, it's friendship, but it's really the kind of love that a parent would have for their child who puts up with all the stuff that goes on in their upbringing, and they're really out for the good of that person. And that's what God is telling us to do. We are to be like God. God is love, to the point where we're even supposed to love our enemies, which is pretty remarkable. So this theme runs throughout the entire set of books. Sometimes it's very explicit, and sometimes it's more implied, or you hear a story and it's like, that person was really loving that other person.
One of the things I appreciate about the chapter is not only talking about the general attributes of love, but you raise a vexing question that I appreciate you addressing: when love and law collide. Now, the easy ones to see are when Jesus actually violated Jewish law, if you will, in the sense that there wasn't a real law there. It was one made up by the Pharisees and the Sadducees of touching an unclean leper, healing people on the Sabbath, and those kinds of things, all the way to in the book of Acts at one point where the disciples are commanded not to share the gospel, and they said in Acts 5:29, we'll obey God rather than men, rather than human leaders. And so there is, I think, when we talk about even the issue of love, the need for us to think biblically about what to do when sometimes from a human point of view, it appears like law and love collide. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, in today's messy world, sometimes it's really hard to determine what to do. And there's situational ethics, and when you think about what to do in certain circumstances, do you obey that law or do you do the loving thing, which they may collide? I'm thinking about driving somebody to the hospital and their water broke, or there was some emergency and you couldn't get the ambulance there, and you're driving and there's a stop sign or there's a stoplight and there's nobody around. And so you decide, the law of love, the proper thing to do is to go through break that law and go through the red light or stop sign. And so there is, love is really the guiding principle that one needs to have when dealing with complicated or crises, complicated situations. And it might be that there's no good option. I think of oftentimes what happens in war, and I think, again, the guiding principle is to do the most loving thing, or not do the unloving thing as much as that you could avoid those things. So all these different situational ethics, I think about Bonhoeffer and what he did during Nazi Germany, And there are consequences for taking an action that is loving. And you may get in trouble for going through that red light, but you did the right thing.
One of the things we're going to do when we come back from the break is get into some others, and one of those is the issue of justice, mercy, and grace. We also have information and a theme about money, possessions, and prosperity. Then some others that I think you're going to find interesting. Life is not fair. That's really a theme that runs through there as well. The whole idea of being saved and delivered all the way to the end of history. And then I might just mention, we'll do our best to try to get to a few of the special topics, because there are also chapters on such things as government, politics, and citizenship, the whole issue of women in the Bible, and then, of course, this very broad topic, which we talk about so often in terms of sex, marriage, and families. And if you find yourself saying, okay, I would be really interested in this book, or I would like to know more about the publishing arm that he is involved with, we have a link to that, bibliopress.com. That's spelled with a Y, so you need to maybe go to our website to find the link there. You'll also find the previous book that we talked about, the Short Bible, or the Simplified Short Bible, there as well. And then, of course, we have information about this book, The Bible I Never Knew. So all sorts of great information there on the website, and I thought it would be helpful for you to go and find some of this, because as we've pointed out before, we really have a need to think about these issues from a biblical perspective. We need to use our biblical worldview to actually understand and even apply our biblical worldview to these particular chapters, 66 chapters in the Bible, 6,000 scripture verses that are actually mentioned that we can rely on to understand those. So when we come back, we're going to get into this issue of justice, both justice in the Old Testament, justice in the New Testament, and then what's the difference between, say, mercy and grace? What are some implications there? Then we'll get into the big topic, of course, of money, possessions, and your prosperity, which I think are important there as well. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll see we have our Take Action item, my viewpoints commentary, and all sorts of other resources that I think you'll find helpful, because we want to equip you to be able to use the Bible in a way that is going to be most responsible, but also to take the Bible and make that the foundation of your biblical world and life view. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again with Peter Bylsma as we talk about his book, The Bible I Never Knew, and again, looking at some of the great themes in the Bible. Peter, let's, if we can, get to the chapter on justice, mercy, and grace. Very important. First of all, justice in the Old and New Testament, and then maybe the distinction between mercy and grace.
Yeah, these are topics that run through the entire Bible, although I think in the New Testament we seem to not have as much emphasis on justice, but actually when you think about justice being fair or right, where we get the word righteous, it is a main theme in the New Testament as well. But the Old Testament has a lot about justice. And of course there's these concepts, justice, mercy, and grace, kind of all relate to each other. Justice is when somebody gets what they deserve. Mercy is when they get kind of like they don't have to pay a penalty. And grace is getting much more than we deserve. My father once told me a story about how to distinguish these three concepts. He said, imagine a person goes before a judge and is fined $1,000 for doing something wrong, and the judge says he's guilty and you pay the fine. He got what he deserves. But if the judge shows mercy, he says guilty, but I'm going to waive the fine. There's no cost. Grace is when the judge says you're guilty and I'm going to give you $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it's some kind of extravagant, a totally undeserved gift. That's what grace is about. And when you think about the prodigal son story, where the father just lavishes his love on his son, the word prodigal actually means lavish. And so the son is lavish, but the father is lavish as well. So this is as much about the prodigal father as it is the prodigal son.
Might just mention, too, the particular chapter deals with indirectly one of the things you hear all the time, and that is God is a God of justice in the Old Testament, a God of grace in the New Testament. But you show us both justice in the Old and New Testament, and you show us grace both in the Old and New Testament. Lots of great verses, and that's one of the things I appreciate about the book as well, because you give the perspective and the commentary, but then you point us back to God's Word to find some of that. But let's keep going, because one of the other chapters is on money, possessions, and prosperity. And I think we begin with the obvious principle we've talked about before. Everything belongs to God, and we are merely stewards, and resources that we have in our hands come from God. But how do we, again, think about some of those issues? Because it oftentimes comes as a surprise to especially young believers to find out that the Bible really says quite a bit about money and possessions, doesn't it?
That's right. It's probably more is said about money and possessions, and indirectly and directly, than any other topic, because we love money, and it's the root of all evil, and it is a way to get along in society. But in fact, you're right. Everything does belong to God. We are stewards, but we have a tendency to think, I did this. I did this work. I own this. It's not just the cattle on 1,000 hills that God owns. Everything we own. And so the question then becomes: so what are we going to do with what God has allowed us to have? And so we're supposed to use our resources wisely for good purposes, which then gets into issues of generosity. How do we help others? And I would have to say that when I read this, when I studied this concept, I realized money can be positive or negative. It can do a lot of good, but when it gets out of balance, or we start to think of it as our own, we can use it for bad purposes. So I would say prosperity and money are a mixed blessing. They're neutral, but they can be good, they can be bad, depending on how they're used.
Very good.
And
yeah, go ahead. One of the other things I thought we might want to talk about is life is not fair. I thought that had so much to say, because if you think of justice as people getting what they deserve, the sad reality is you can spend some time in the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament and the Psalms and Job and other passages, seeing that sometimes people that are evil prosper. Then, of course, I just mentioned Job. You see the situation where good people suffer, and in some cases, innocent people suffer. And so I thought that was a really helpful chapter, because in some respects, again, a young believer might, for the first time reading through the Bible, come across all these passages where David and others in the Psalms are sort of saying, how is it that the evil people are thriving and the good people are suffering? But the Bible is very honest about the fact that that does indeed take place.
Yeah, and I think there are some people that think that if a person is a Christian or believes in God, everything's going to be fine. And then they blame God when something bad happens. And there's bad things happening all the time. And it's not God's fault. We live in a world that has good and bad in it. And therefore, life is going to, throw us some curveballs. And I mean, there are plenty of examples in our lives where things happen that just, they're awful. And if God didn't will them, didn't want them, but that's the nature of life. And I think the book of Job is really interesting because it ends in a way that never resolves that question. Bad things happen to a really good person, but it's silent on, why that is, other than, the sun shines on the just and the unjust. And so we live in this world where good things are happening and bad things happening, and don't blame God for the bad things.
One of the things, of course, you talk about in that chapter gets into, how do we go to heaven, which, of course, bleeds into the next chapter on being saved or delivered. And again, if you think about that, the overriding theme from Genesis to Revelation is God working through individuals and through ultimately the birth of his son, death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, that brings about this idea of our deliverance. So whether it's deliverance from evil on the world or the ultimate deliverance from pain and suffering and death and going to heaven, that is certainly a theme in the Bible, isn't it?
That's right. And it's God's grace that we get to go to heaven, even though we're sinful people. And so in that sense, life is not fair. We get more than we deserve.
So again, I think that's one of those key passages that talks about that issue as well. Let me take one more just before I take a break, and that is this idea of living in the world, because in some respects, that is one of the great challenges for all of us, because if you lived in a culture or you were surrounded by Christians all the time, that's sort of a different kind of situation. But the Bible was written at a time in which believers, especially in the New Testament, were surrounded by hostility from Jewish people, from pagan people, from the Roman Empire. And so in some respects, many of those passages, especially in the New Testament, applicable to us today. Isn't that right?
That's right. And we have a choice about how we're going to live in the world. There are some that just want to get away from it all and go into the mountains and not be tainted by the world. There's also this idea that you're in the world but not of the world, and so you kind of separate yourself from people who are not Christian. The downside of that is that you're not going to be able to have any influence on those people. It's a little bit of a retreat in the midst of those who are not believers. The model that Jesus had is he was in the world. He was hanging around with all the wrong people, according to the Pharisees. And so the challenge is to be in the world but not of the world. I think of Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That is the major challenge, to live in that world, to have relationships with other people, but still maintain our godly life. And that is the challenge, and that's why we need each other in the body of Christ. Prayer, studying the Word, understanding what it really means, not just understanding a few concepts, but really having a deep understanding of what biblical principles are.
Let's take a break. We've looked at 6 of those themes. We'll come back and pick off at least 2 more. And again, it's all part of the book, The Bible I Never Knew. And if you'd like to know more about it, you can go to our website, pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Peter Bylsma as we talk about the Bible I Never Knew. And Peter, you had a chapter on unusual perspectives, which I thought was interesting because it's not maybe something I would have thought to put in there, but that is really the case, that oftentimes Jesus would take something in the Old Testament and now as he is speaking to the disciples, and of course eventually it ends up in our New Testament, the stories, the parables had a twist He uses hyperbole. He really, in some cases, really challenges some of the misinterpretation that existed at that time in the Jewish hierarchy. And so in some respects, we should be expected that as we get into the Word, we will find some things that will challenge our faith, just as he challenged the faith and belief of those people in the first century.
That's right. And these are the most challenging teachings that we have to deal with because they are counterintuitive. They're the opposite of what we tend to, how we act naturally. So the journey upward is really a journey downward. Humility and servanthood are things that were not valued at the time, but those are the things that God highly values. So the greatest of these is the least of these. Kind of these opposites, these paradoxes, where we gain power by not having power. We're not trying to control things. We let God be in control rather than us be in control. There's just you lose your life to gain it. That's another example. These are not. We're strong when we are weak. These are unusual, unpopular. They're not easy to follow, especially in a world that is emphasizing other things. So I would say they're countercultural. They're somewhat irrational, but they are things that we're supposed to do. So it's just a really challenging life. Being a Christian is not easy.
For sure. Your last chapter, before we get to some of the special topics, is the end of history, and that gets us into the idea of the kingdom. A lot of people say, well, is the kingdom here? Yes, but not yet. And there's a sense in which, of course, Jesus is talking about a king who would judge the people, separate sheep from goats. That's in the future, but he also says the kingdom is here among you because he was there. So in some respects, we need to have a little more understanding of what the kingdom means, since we talk about kingdom living, don't we?
That's right. And that kind of gets into the next chapter after that, which is about our citizenship, government, politics, and citizenship. When you think about it, we are citizens of heaven. Part of my background has been in international relations, and I was a diplomat, and I traveled extensively around the world as a representative of the U.S. government. And so when I would go to another country, I would follow their rules. But if they had a rule that I had to do something like, pledge allegiance to their flag, I would say, no, I can't do that because my citizenship is elsewhere. And so when you think about our ultimate citizenship is in heaven, not to a particular country, that means we are representing God here on earth. And so you're living in the world again, but not of the world. You're representing Jesus and God, and that drives our ultimate priority. So who knows what's going to happen in the future? It seems like things are coming more to the end. I don't know. I know that, I'm going to die. I don't know when. But in the meantime, we should be God's ambassadors and representatives of heaven here on earth. And that is not an easy thing to do. But we have to have a good understanding of what that citizenship means. What are the values of heaven so that we can represent them well here on earth?
Well said. Of course, you have a chapter on women in the Bible, but also on sex, marriage, and families, which has become, and again, it's one of those sections you have in special topics, but it's important because that's been kind of the focus of a lot of hostility to Christianity. When we say we believe in marriage between one man and one woman, we believe that it's a man and a woman, almost immediately just making some statements like that can put you on the wrong side of a lot of political debate. But that's why we, once again, need to come back to biblical principles, don't we?
That's right. And I was actually surprised by some of the things I found or didn't find in the Scripture. on this topic. And I do not take a position. I'm very familiar with, different perspectives that people have on some of these issues. And I lay out the scriptural support for different positions.
Mm-hmm.
I lay out kind of both sides. And there's lots of arguments and there's divisions among the body about some of these topics. And so being an objective person by nature and by training, I lay out the pros and cons or the different views so that people can understand, why somebody might believe something. And it's this last chapter was the hardest for me to do because I almost didn't want to write it, but I thought, no, this is really important. And there are sections in this chapter that I thought, do I really want to go there? And I got a sense from God that's saying, yeah, you need to go. It's very uncomfortable, but it is what it is. And some of the things that we have believed are not based on Scripture. They could still be valid for other reasons, but let's just not say that God said it this way.
Yes. Very well said. And again, we sometimes make the joke that I believe in the Bible from Genesis to maps, and that's just a joke, of course, but you do have 10 maps in the back, which I found just as helpful. Of course, you have a whole section here, the Bible in a nutshell, and then theological terms, which are defined in a number of other things. So it's just a really helpful book, whether you're a young Christian trying to learn about the Bible for the first time, or whether you're maybe an older Christian like Peter and myself who've had opportunities to teach this and everything else. I think you're really going to appreciate that. The Bible I Never Knew. We also, of course, have a link, so if you'd like to correspond with Peter, we have the bibliopress.com. We, of course, also have a link to both his X and Facebook page. So if nothing else, Peter, I appreciate the fact that you've taken so much time to write this book and the previous book as well, but also appreciate the fact that you gave us an hour today to really spend some time looking through the Bible and learning at least some of the major themes in the Bible. So thank you for your work. Thank you for writing the short Bible, and thank you for writing this one, The Bible I Never Knew.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take a break, but just before we do so, let me one more time mention that we have all the links there. If you find yourself saying, well, I kind of would like to get a copy of this book, you might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but it's been out for a while, so maybe harder to find. So that's why we have a link where you can get it in paperback and hardback. As you might imagine, paperback a little cheaper, which is the one I've got in front of me here. I'm holding up in case you haven't seen it. And, of course, that is just one of the books because we also have a link to his website, Bibliopress, which is spelled with a Y, so you'll have to maybe find the link on the website there, and that will then tell you about some of the books, but in particular, we featured this one, The Bible I Never Knew, but I might also point you to the Short Bible, which is a chronological summary of the Old and New Testament, all of it available at our website at pointofview.net, and you've been listening to Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Going through the stations and caught Kerby and a very interesting topic. So just listening to it, and so just by hearing the topic, I can relate to some of those topics. But it has impacted my life a lot. I enjoy listening to the station.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
My wife and I have listened to Point of View for about 17 years now. We just want you to know how much you have meant to us in our lives. I've gotten a real education since I've started listening to Point of View.
I want you to think, what would we do? How ignorant would we be if we didn't have Point of View? And come on, guys, give something to Point of View to make sure we don't lose this wonderful voice. And thanks again for what you do.
Thank you, Kerby. I consider this my school time, so my 2 hours of school each day. So thank you very much.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, uncertainty, fear, cancer, life can change in a moment. And yet, I think we still also have an opportunity to see how God can use difficult circumstances to provide hope. And you may be in the midst of a challenge. You may be coming out of a challenge. Maybe in the future you're headed towards a challenge. I think you're really going to benefit from this book, which is written by Phil Zielke. He was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Then, after chemotherapy and treatments, was able to move on. But 3 months before his wedding, news of his cancer came back again. Going through the disease 2 times, of course, affected him in very significant ways, but we also want to focus on the hope. But while he was in a hospital bed, that's where he had the vision for Phil's Friends, and we have a link to philsfriends.org. But first of all, let's welcome to the microphone Phil Zielke. And Phil, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's great to be with you.
Well, I guess I just need you to tell the story. I left out a lot of details, and I know you probably can fill them in a better way. And then I might just point out that your book really takes us through all sorts of issues: perseverance, finding hope in the midst of this, a promise, maybe even sometimes needing an attitude adjustment. So in some respects, the book is a little bit about your disease, but mostly about how you've really developed a ministry to help people if they're going through one of these very significant challenges.
Yeah, so my story started when I was 22 years old, and I'd been in and out of the doctor for about a year already at that point. Didn't know what was wrong with me. And I think sometimes the worst things in our life is the fear of the unknown that can just creep up, and you just want answers. And for me, I had, lost 40 pounds, had night sweats every night, hip pains and fevers, and the doctors couldn't figure it out. So I really thought I was going to pass away before I had any news. And so it was in April of 2004 when I had a fever for about 103 the entire week, and I had lymph nodes up in my neck, in my arms, under my groin, a lot of different places. And finally, they referred me to a surgeon. Went into the surgeon's office, and they wanted to do a needle aspiration. And I remember looking at the doctor saying, "Needles? I don't do needles." But they ended up putting a needle into my neck, drew out some fluid, and so much fluid came out, it spilled all over the floor. So I saw the doctor look at the nurse look at the doctor with worried looks on their faces. Next day, results still came back negative. They said, as a precaution, let's get a couple of lymph nodes taken out. So they did. The day after that, we had arranged for my dad to hear the results, and he came home early from work, sat on my bedside, and he said, "Phil, I don't know how to tell you this. I talked to the doctors, and you have cancer." I remember looking at him, just wondering how this could be, when a couple days ago they said it wasn't. And right there, my dad did something very important with me. He prayed with me on the side of my bed. He said, "Lord, I know that Phil's your child. No matter if he's supposed to live another 6 months, another year, another 40 years, whatever it may be, may he and his life bring glory to you, and may his life, just basically shine light on how good you are." And after that, I went to my hospital bed for the next 6 months, did chemotherapy, ended up getting better, started my first year as a 4th grade teacher, and I got re-diagnosed a year after my first diagnosis.
Right.
And went through it for another year, the chemo, the stem cell, and the radiation. But it was the things that people did for me. It was how I learned how faithful God was in those difficult moments. That's really what brought me through and really gave me the hope to live each and every day. when I face this.
Let me talk about the medical, and of course, most everything we're going to talk about is just how to deal with that. But when the doctor actually pulled out that fluid, and it was so significant that it spilled on the floor, he said, Phil, I've been practicing as a surgeon for over 30 years, and I've seen a few similar situations. There's a 50% chance it's cancer. And so in some respects, you already had that possibility. He had that. But it is interesting that even at that late date, they still couldn't give you the actual diagnosis, which I think gets back to that anxiety. I've had some people say, at least once I got a diagnosis, whatever it was, it could have been, Hodgkin's disease, it could be bone cancer, it could be breast cancer, it could be whatever. At least I had a diagnosis. I think in some respects, up until that time, there was just a massive amount of uncertainty in your life, wasn't there?
There really was. And I think, again, those uncertainties, that's where fear really can creep in. And if you focus on your situation, it's really as you go through that and, as you get some answers and as you go day by day, keeping your eyes focused on the Lord. And that's really where, when there are uncertainties in your life, that the fear can dissipate.
One of the things I appreciate about your chapters is each one of them at the end has some possible areas for you to have some reflection. So this is certainly a book I'd want to give to somebody who's going through whatever it might be. It might be cancer. It might be a variety of other issues. But you have chapters, for example, on perseverance and courage. And in some respects, it almost doesn't matter what your diagnosis is. In some respects, you're really sharing some biblical principles to help us get through those difficult and tough times, aren't you?
Yes. And I think, if you look in what Paul said in the book of Philippians, for I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, and that those verses, they end up ending with, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And on my hospital bed, that's when I learned that I couldn't do all things on my own. It was really Christ, stepping into my life, of me surrendering this entire situation to him. And once you do that and surrender your life to him, you're able to have the fruits of the Spirit and really enjoy of having love and joy and peace and patience. And yes, cancer, stage 4 cancer was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. My family's had to journey with me on. But I got to tell you, I was better off losing my physical health and finding the Lord through that journey than I was before that sickness.
I just mentioned, too, that if you go to the book, there's a wonderful picture of you and your family and the rest. But let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about maybe finding hope in the midst of fog, which is one of the chapters in your book, because that's key. And also the importance of words and encouragement, and even a chapter on comfort to comfort others, because one of the questions, Phil, that I think a lot of people have is, when I hear that Phil has cancer, I don't know what to say. Probably what I say is the wrong thing to say, but even if I want to provide some comfort, I sometimes don't know how to do that. But also maybe to share how, if we have been through a difficult situation, in some respects that prepares us for others. And then during the break, I want to encourage you to click on the picture that we have here of Phil, and then click on the button that says visit the website, because that will take you to Phil's friends. And I want you to see that that might be a great resource for you in terms of some of the things that are available there as well. We'll talk about what Phil's Friends is, how you could request a care package, how you might even want to donate or be involved in some of the activities there. But if you find yourself saying, this might be a book I would like to read, or this might be a book I'd like to purchase to pass on to someone else, the title of it is simply Seeing the Good in It. And as you might imagine, we have information about that on our website. And if you click on that, again, you might be able to find the book in your local bookstore. But here we have it available in hardback, and it's something you can pass on. There's also an audio CD that you might want to consider. So while we go to a break, good time to go to our website, pointofview.net, and also check out the website that Phil Zielke has. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Target is the latest in a string of retail giants who have taken a stance against the wildly unpopular diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. That is how Steve Forbes begins his commentary on DEI in the business world. He adds that the recent move comes in the wake of similar actions by Walmart, Amazon, Meta, and Tractor Supply Company. As I mentioned in my commentary last week, the decision by large companies like Walmart to move away from DEI will certainly encourage other businesses to do the same. Target first announced its bathroom policy about gender identity back in 2016. It triggered a backlash in boycotts, but Tim Wildman of the American Family Association announced on my radio program they were ending their Target boycott. Not only are businesses changing their view about DEI, but Steve Forbes points to political leaders who are also expressing concern about DEI. Former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg recently criticized companies that use DEI training because it makes people sit through training that looks like something out of Portlandia. Longtime Democratic Party strategist James Carville has been critical of his party's self-destructive language and attitudes. He criticized the party's woke gender rules as stunningly stupid policies. You know, DEI policies are not only unpopular, they are unproductive. As I've cited in other commentaries, several business school studies illustrate the failings of DEI. Steve Forbes observes that numerous initiatives have unnecessarily raised the prices of energy, food, transportation, and housing. It appears that corporate America has discovered that DEI is a problem, and it is time to get back to work to please their customers. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on biblical reliability, go to viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. Viewpoints.info/biblical reliability. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again with Phil Zielke as we talk about his book, Seeing the Good in It. And Phil, I might just mention that your father, Steve, is the one that wrote the introduction, but I think it illustrates the fact that really an individual does not go through a cancer journey or anything else. You go through it with your extended family, don't you?
Oh, it's so true. Cancer, I mean, when we think about cancer and people having it, we often think about the physical effects and effect it has on your body, but it affects you emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, every part of you and every part of your family and friend network that's connected to you, people that care for you, people that stay up night, late at night and pray for you. But I was so grateful to have my dad on my bedside almost every night, sleeping on the couch in my hospital room after he worked full time, and he knew what to do. He knew how to come in and knock on the door and let me know that he's there and meet my energy level and where I was and just sit with me. A lot of times, when someone's sick or when I was going through this disease, it's just about being there, your physical presence. There's so much power in your presence.
Wow. Well, you talk about the mental issue. And of course, you do talk about the fact that as bad as the physical toll of cancer is, the mental toll was even worse, wasn't it?
It really was. And thankfully, God sees every detail of our stories. And so I had a group of people who put a care package together for me. They all signed their names to it. They said they were thinking about me, praying for me. I got that about a week after I was diagnosed, and it caused me to break down and cry, in tears, to know that I wasn't going to be alone. I had people that took time out of their busy schedules to do this for me, and that I wasn't going to walk this journey again, by myself. And then I had individuals who sent me cards in the mail that came every single week. And when I was well enough, I'd lay upstairs. When I was out of the hospital, I'd lay upstairs on the couch, and I'd look forward to when it was 1 o'clock. And why 1 o'clock? Because that's when the mailman came. Mm-hmm. And so I'd work my energy to the edge of the couch, down the stairs, out to the front door to see what remembered me. And every single week for 2 years, I pulled a card out with my name on it.
Wow.
It always came at the right time with the right message, as if God personally put that letter into the mailbox himself. And so I'd go back up the couch, I'd go back up the stairs, sit on the couch, and I'd open that card. And if I was weak, it'd be a verse such as Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And then I had my grandfather who had driven 300 miles. God rest his soul. He went to heaven to be with the Lord about a month ago. But he had driven and showed up in my hospital room. He was sitting in the corner of the room. He had papers all over the place because he was and highlighters. He was a lifelong learner, teacher, and pastor. And he said, "Phil, I went to your house. I grabbed your Bible, and I highlighted all the verses with hope and strength and peace." And then he read those aloud to me, walked over to my bedside, got down about eye level, and he said, "Phil, I need to tell you something. Your Graham and I, we love you. But most importantly, your Heavenly Father does." Then he took that Bible, put it on my nightstand, and walked out. And when I couldn't have visitors or didn't want visitors, it was opening that book of God's Word and committing those verses in my head and into my heart that kept me going day after day.
And much of that, of course, you do share in your book, Seeing the Good in It, and certainly that is the case. One other thing I thought I'd bring up, since we were talking about the mental issues, is how sometimes when you have fear and anxiety, you tend to exaggerate what is happening. I had a guest in studio a while back and said, I thought about all the things I used to worry about, and I concluded that 90% of those things never really took place. And so in some respects, there is a tendency sometimes for us to exaggerate reality, isn't there?
There definitely is. I think when you're in a hospital room or you're going through something difficult in your life, if you focus on that situation instead of your eyes on the Lord, that's where fear really creeps in. The image that I always got was when I was laying in my hospital bed. It's as if those fears just came in, toxic, odorless gases, through the air vents. Before you know it, other people that are with you might even recognize that you have fear before you even do. But the way that those things can really dissipate, again, is by we look in the book of James, chapter 4, verse 8, and it says, "When I draw near to God, he'll draw near to me." And so whether you're sick on your hospital bed or at home and you reach your hand up to him, he's putting his hand inside of yours, or you're walking down the road into something difficult or a family issue, he takes you by the hand. And when you focus on him, all of a sudden those fears can wash away.
Some of your chapters about changing from the inside out, needing an attitude adjustment. Certainly that is. But again, comforted to comfort others, because in some respects, that's what your book is about. But it's also what Phil's Friends about, because you have traveled through this journey. I say that if I went to a hospital bed of somebody dealing with cancer, I can certainly have empathy and sympathy and certainly have a presence there. But the impact that you can have is greater because you've traveled that road. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted for a few minutes to talk about what is on your website, philsfriends.org. One of those is you can find out more about that. And I think you can see some of the stories, and they're really incredible stories, some of the pictures and care packages, cards of hope, hope centers, and the rest. But talk about what people will find when they come to that website, because they may even know somebody who would want to click on that button to request a care package. And so you're really providing some opportunities for our listeners. So what will they find when they land on your website?
Sure. First of all, if you know someone who's been diagnosed with cancer, a loved one, a family member, a coworker, anywhere across the country, you can go to our website, philsfriends.org, and request a free care package for them. It goes out in a decorated box. We have volunteers that pack those in our hope centers. The same way that I got a care package where everybody signed their names to it, everybody will sign their name to that. But it has comforting items in there, such as blankets and journals and crosswords. We put a Bible in there and a gospel letter, just because we want to make sure that people know who the Lord is, that he's there for them as they go through this difficult time. And then that care package shows up anonymously on someone's doorstep. And if you request it today, it's going to be on someone's doorstep next week. And then after that, we send cards of hope the same way that I got cards. We send cards every month that go in the mail for a year. And so we have kids as young as 3 or people as old as 95 that are working on these cards. They have a joke on them because laughter is very good for the soul when you're going through something difficult, and a prayer and a Bible verse. And you might get a card from someone in Ohio one week and Texas the next week. But that's one way that you can start the process, is by requesting a care package for someone you know and someone you love. Also, there's volunteer opportunities that you can get involved in, such as making blankets, having events at your church. We have hope packing parties where you can collect the items. We get everything ready to go, and then we help you connect with the local hospital or get those in your hands to go and bring God's love and encouragement into the community. And I know in God's word it says that, when we were sick, it was as if you visited me. And so that's our calling, to go out and do that. And that's why the Lord is blessing this ministry. And then also, if you'd like to give or you want a copy of the book, you can make a donation of $50 or more, and I'll send a signed copy out, and that'll help to fund these care packages and these cards.
Again, I'll hold up the book for those of you watching online. And of course, you can find out all that by going to the website, Providing Christ-Centered Support and Hope for Those Affected by Cancer. Matthew 25, verse 36, I was sick and you visited me. And I might just mention real quickly that you have some events, and because you're located in the Illinois-Indiana area, there's golf tournaments and there's various events, and of course, people could come by. But wherever you are listening to this, all around the country, you can certainly find the link to all of this, and that would be really helpful. But just before I let you go, talk about this book, because in some respects, whether they go to the website or not, I hope people will, they could get a copy of this book and pass it on to someone, and with their own handwritten notes in it, or maybe some of the other material, then of course you have a QR code in the back that will take them to philsfriends.org, and so those individuals could be beneficial in that respect. But there's a way in which this book can be that first step to reaching out to an individual who is suffering, and you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, but maybe the first step could be handing them a copy of this book.
Yeah, and the book is called Seeing the Good in It for a reason, because we all go through difficult times in our lives, and they become difficult to navigate. But really seeing the good in it is really seeing God in it, which I really think is a miracle when you're going through something difficult, to see God in the midst of those circumstances. And so it can be an encouragement to you. We've had churches that have read that as studies, up to 60 people at a time, and gone through the process themselves or read it individually. But we really want this to be a tool and also a challenge to you of how God wants to use you when you go through difficult times to be able to help others.
Let me mention, too, as he said, that there are reflection questions at the end of each one of the chapters. So this is one that you could go through individually, but I know for those of you that maybe have a small group or a Sunday school class or a Bible fellowship, this might be a way that you could go through this together. And so, again, you can find out more by going to our website at pointofview.net. We have information about the book. We have an information about Phil's friends and all sorts of other great resources. So, Phil, thank you for taking the time to write the book. Thank you for establishing that ministry, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby, and God bless your ministry.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, you know what? About time to talk about a few issues in the news, and I'm going to try to clarify some misinformation. I know that happens every once in a while. Some actually, I think, even deliberate disinformation that we need to address before it goes any further. And so we'll see if we can stop a few of those myths and misinformation, disinformation, and quite frankly, lies about a few things. And we won't have a lot of time, but I'll try to run through a few of them fairly quickly. All that coming up right after this.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we're going to talk about, if we have time, 3 different attempts by those people that may disagree with some of the things we talk about here on Point of View to completely misrepresent what is happening. And the first of those has to do with our action item. If you go to our website right now, and this has just been posted in the last few minutes, so you might have to refresh it if you've been on our website, we have a section that says Stop Illegal Immigrants from Voting in Federal Elections. Now, what we're talking about is a piece of legislation that has already passed the House. It is called the SAVE Act. SAVE stands for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. Now, you are going to hear people say that this is an attempt to disenfranchise different individuals who want to vote, and they're going to lose their ability to vote in American elections. Don't believe it, first of all. The particular piece of legislation would require a person to vote in person, to register to vote in person, showing proof of citizenship. And that could be anything. It could be a birth certificate, passport, naturalization cards, whatever it might be. It stipulates that each state must create procedures to ensure that citizens who have changed their legal name, for instance, due to marriage, are still able to register to vote. But the biggest issue, of course, is this, that you need to actually be providing some kind of proof of citizenship. Last time a survey was done, 83% of Americans support the idea of proof of citizenship requirements when registering to vote. What is so interesting is this piece of legislation not only was passed in the House of Representatives, where I believe all the Republicans voted for it. I know that at least 4 Democrats in the House voted for it, but I also know, because I receive these emails all the time from people on the Democratic Party arguing that this is going to be something that is being pushed through by Trump and by Republicans and trying to prevent people from voting. No, we want people that are eligible to vote to vote. We just don't want people who are not eligible to vote. And we know this is not speculation. We now have very good facts that a good number of people that are not citizens of the United States have been voting and been voting for some time. And so this is an opportunity for you to contact your 2 United States senators. You know the drill. We have contact information. Again, let me mention that if you haven't filled it out recently, we have a different system. So you may have to fill it out again, but once that's the case, you can click on the button that says Remember Me, and then next time it'll have it automatically. We then have for you the suggested letter, just 2 paragraphs long, very simple. You can modify it any way you want. You can then click Send, and then it's sent to both of your senators in that state. Or you might say, well, I'd like to print it out and then maybe sign it or add some material to it. So you can click on that button that says Print and Mail. Or if you say, well, I just want to look at it, how it's going to go out, you can hit Preview. So again, that is on the website right now. And so if you said, wait a minute, I wanted to do the one on DEI, especially since, Kerby, your commentary today was on DEI and business, well, then click on the button that says See More Action Alerts, and then you will see that the previous one we had up just up until about an hour ago on contacting Congress about dismantled DEI is available for you there as well. So this is the latest one. It's an action item, and even though we didn't have a chance to talk about it in the first hour, we'll try to cover some of that tomorrow once again. And this you can find on the website, pointofview.net. Go to the middle section, says Take Action, and click on the button that says Take Action, Stop Illegal Immigrants from Voting in Federal Elections. Pretty straightforward, something we've talked about so many times. We will send out an email, but it will not be going out right away. I think we'll send it out after Easter because all the things that are happening right now. But you can take action right now, and we make it possible for you to do so very easily. So that's our first one. Our second one is simply this. One of the other emails I received last night was saying that Republicans are trying to destroy Medicaid. And if you receive Gary Bauer's end of day report, you'll see that the one from yesterday says it's day 86 of President Trump's second term. No one has lost their Social Security, Medicare, or veterans benefits in spite of constant media and leftist lies. He will have one in just a few minutes coming out. It's day 87, and nobody has lost anything from Medicare, Medicaid, and all the rest. And that is, I think, this constant drumbeat that people that are trying to save Social Security and trying to make sure that we can have a more effective Medicaid system aren't trying to destroy it. And that brings me to my first article. This comes from the Wall Street Journal. It's from the editors of the Wall Street Journal, and it says simply, "The Moral Case for Reforming Medicaid." And they point out that Republicans in Congress passed their budget outline this week, and now they have to fill in the blanks with new policies. It's a once-in-a-generation chance to reform the government, but it will be squandered if the Republicans shrink from their difficult policy fights. Exhibit A, they say, is Medicaid, a fast-growing entitlement that now spends more than $850 billion a year while delivering, and I think this is their words, and accurate, subpar health care for the poor. They argue that right now the press and the left are trying to intimidate Republicans. But again, the argument that comes from the editors of the Wall Street Journal are Republicans can win the Medicaid argument if they understand how the program has gone wrong and make their case in the moral terms it deserves. What are we talking about? Turns out that when we do any kind of reasonable evaluation, we find that more than 6 in 10, in other words, more than 60% of the individuals on Medicaid are adults who reported no earned income. Now, you can begin to see where that takes us, because this would suggest that you are taking advantage of something which was intended for poor people, and as a result, you are able-bodied, but you're not working. And of course, the bottom line is people, most voters tend to think of Medicaid as a safety net for like low-income pregnant women, disabled Americans. That is true. But the argument has been that, well, we need to expand it. And under Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, it expanded that into what has become kind of a permanent entitlement. And you will then sometimes hear what I think is a false figure, a false statistic, that 92% of able-bodied Medicaid adults under age 65 worked full or part-time. Well, it turns out, and again, that's why I give this article to you, because it's a way to counter all of the deliberate, I think, misinformation out there right now, because that figure is derived from government survey data. In other words, are you working? The people say, yeah, I'm working, even if they haven't worked for years. Well, there have been individuals that have said, maybe that is not necessarily right. And so what they did is the group that was working in this particular area, the Foundation for Government Accountability, they went back and looked at the administrative records from the various state Medicaid agencies in 23 different states to get a more complete picture of those individuals who are, it's 21 million able-bodied adults that are on Medicaid, and then could look and see whether or not they were actually working. And guess what? They were not. So again, there are in these particular areas of Medicaid recognize that some people might be able-bodied, but they may not be able to work. And so Republicans, when they've talked about Medicaid, have offered exceptions for all sorts of plausible reasons. You're pregnant, have children, caring for an incapacitated relative, you're exempt. You got a doctor's note attesting that you're unfit for work, you're exempt. If you're enrolled in school or getting help for alcohol or drug abuse, you're exempt. But as the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, put it the other day, he said Medicaid isn't for a 29-year-old male sitting in their couches playing video games. And he says, we're going to find those guys and we're going to send them back to work. If you've heard any of the commentary I've given over the last couple of months about the growing number of individuals who are able-bodied and they're not working, they're not looking for work, and they are in many cases receiving all sorts of government benefits, it seems to me that encouraging an individual that has the ability to go out and get a job, and thus once you get a job, probably have access to better health care is good because, let's face it, Medicaid isn't exactly the best way to deal with health care because oftentimes doctors won't even accept it because of the low reimbursement rates. So that's my second argument, which again is being deliberately, seemingly misrepresented. And if you'd like to get the facts, that's our first article today on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We've got more to cover right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me real quickly go through one of the other articles here, which I, again, hope you will read in its entirety because it's pointing out the fact that the title by Matt Vespa is Former Rolling Stone Editor on Globalism. It's time to blow it up or time to end it. And really what he's talking about is an individual we've quoted before, and that's Matt Taibbi, who used to be an editor for Rolling Stone magazine. Now, he looks at things from a left of center point of view, but you hear me quoting him quite often because he is an individual that has seen what has happened with the censorship of divergent points of view, and he certainly believes in free speech. He's also been observing and really had a place of great observation because of his position in the past and even now to what has happened with this whole idea of globalism, that we need to lower all sorts of trade barriers. We should forget about tariffs. We should agree to have China in the World Trade Organization. We should implement NAFTA, and on and on and on. And he is, interestingly enough, as a classic liberal, as Matt Vespa points out, recognizing that maybe it is time to rethink everything from free trade, tariffs, globalization, and the rest. And he points out, as an individual that really does appreciate what used to be the core of the Democratic Party, what he calls the working class. He says union workers know that it's a red flag when you have the political class telling us we need NAFTA, we need World Trade Organization, we need the World Economic Forum, we need to have kind of a globalist perspective, when as a result it ends up not benefiting the working class. And as a result, his argument is, this comes again from a person looking at this from a liberal point of view, the working class has been slaving away, denigrated, forgotten, and taken for granted. And as a result, then when they started voting Republican, the Democratic Party turned its attention from what used to be kind of the core of the Democratic Party to, again, his some of the comments Matt Vespa says, replaced by the overeducated wealthy snobs who go online to anyone complaining about the cost of living to mock these people for not going to college, and gives you some links, and then a very lengthy piece, first with a presentation by National Public Radio, and then some of the response to it. And so you can read it. Given the limited amount of time I have left, I did want to get to our third point, and that is, again, this almost deliberate misrepresentation of what is taking place. And, of course, the other day, when we had this attack against the Pennsylvania governor, we certainly were aware of the fact that this was an individual who, if you follow any of the information about him, looks like he was kind of a socialist. At one point, they left that out in some of the presentations and made it sound like, well, he's really a Trump supporter. Well, he hates Trump even more. He was, in a sense, attacking Governor Shapiro because, if anything, he wasn't liberal enough. Let's also just admit that some of these people are just crazy. I mean, they just really are. So to try to assign them as left or right is really kind of ridiculous. But the reason I bring it out is this last article, because Derek Hunter reminds us that they're on CNN, and I alluded to that yesterday. You had somebody coming on saying that the real problem is not left of center violent actions, which would require you to not pay attention to a list I'll give you in just a minute, or even the latest surveys that we talked about that suggest that the left-leaning individuals were quite okay, to a majority that would say it could be justified, or at least partially or somewhat justified, to assassinate Donald Trump, assassinate Elon Musk, to destroy Tesla dealerships and cars and things of that nature. And so as a result, it was just a reminder that we are getting what some people have referred to as an assassination culture. It's one thing to have a cancel culture. It's quite another to have an assassination culture. And this is where, again, Derek Hunter says, when he goes all the way back and says, well, look at the dangers of the right wing, and goes back to Oklahoma City, the bombing, which took place in 1995, so that's 30 years ago, illustrates that. But he says it would be nice if you were just to ignore the number of trans activists, especially one trans activist that shot up a school one day, and then another one that did it in another venue, or James Hodgkinson trying to murder as many Republicans as possible on a baseball field. And CNN at the time moved off the story before Steve Scalise was even off of life support. Of course, roving bands of leftists spending a year trying to attack police, business owners, burning down buildings, and it was all part of the Summer of Love. And just a reminder that if you doubt that there is left-wing violence today, he says, well, just ask any Jewish student on campus right now. Ask anybody that maybe owns a Tesla car, and you will certainly see that there is a big issue in that regard. And so I just think one more time, it's an illustration of why you should read widely. In this particular case, just a minute ago, we talked about, read some of the Substack material from Matt Taibbi, left of center individual, used to write for Rolling Stone magazine because he's got some really interesting things to say. But also, I saw this interesting little meme that came out from Peachy Keenan. I really didn't know much about Peachy Keenan, but I did some research because I've already looked at Penna Dexter's commentary for Friday, which you can read. And she quotes from Peachy Keenan. Yeah, that's not her name. But nevertheless, she says, right now, look at the people that are being put front and center by people that are left of center. First of all, a murderer named Luigi, and Luigi Mangione, who killed the healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Number two, the murderer named Carmelo. You might say, who is that? Well, that just happened down the road from us. Carmelo Anthony is a young man who had an argument with Austin Metcalf at a track meet, pulls out a knife, plunges it into his body, and kills him. And then I see this piece from Dinesh D'Souza saying that Carmelo Anthony has now been able to make bond. He's renting a $900,000 house in a gated community with a family, bought a new car after his release. And, of course, under that, Dinesh D'Souza says, who says crime doesn't pay? Then they talk about an MS-13 illegal gang member. We'll get into that probably tomorrow. And even a Palestinian Hamas supporter. And as I've said on more than one occasion, I think there are reasons to be concerned about some of the cuts that are being done by DOJ. But if you're concerned about that, maybe you should have been concerned about all the money that's been misspent up until this time that nobody seemed to really care about. There's a reason to be concerned about a person here or there that might be deported without the proper vetting. But if you're concerned about that, how about being concerned about all the people that were let into this country without any kind of vetting at all? And I think it's just a reminder that right now, this is pretty odd that the leaders that are part of the Democratic Party, or at least the leaders in the left part of the Democratic Party, they are actually willing to die on a hill that makes no sense to me, and focusing so much time and attention on an individual that is an MS-13 gang member, which is right now in El Salvador, when there are some very legitimate issues to be addressed as legislation is making its way through Congress, one of which is, again, I hope you'll take some action on. It's on the website, Stop Illegal Immigrants from Voting in Federal Elections. If you'd like to have your 2 United States senators hear from you, we've made it possible for you to do that today. We'll talk about it again tomorrow. And that's really all we have for today. I've left a lot on the table. We'll see if we can get to some of that tomorrow. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
Third paragraph is a real tongue twister, but we'll give it a try.